My brother-in-law looked my 9-year-old daughter in the eye and said, "That's a pretty sad little gift for a pretty sad little kid." He said it with a smile, like it was funny. Like she wasn't standing right there holding the card I'd made her, the one I'd spent 2 hours on, because she'd asked for a handmade birthday card this year, specifically because she'd seen one on Pinterest and thought it was beautiful. My daughter's name is Poppy. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, and she did not cry. She just looked down at the card in her hands, and then she looked back up at him, and she didn't say anything. That silence was worse than if she burst into tears. I know my kid. That silence meant something inside her had gone very, very still. His name is Donovan. He's been married to my sister Camille for 6 years. I have never fully liked him, but I tried. God, I tried. For Camille's sake, I laughed at his jokes and sat through his long opinions about things he barely understood and never once said out loud what I actually thought of him. I was good at keeping the peace. I was always the one in our family who kept the peace. What Donovan didn't know, what he apparently forgot or never bothered to care about, was exactly how much peacekeeping I had been doing for him specifically. Let me back up. Camille and Donovan got married when she was 27. I was 24 and already working a stable job in healthcare administration. Donovan had what I can only describe as a series of almost careers. Almost got that contractor license, almost launched that landscaping company, almost finished his associate's degree. Camille worked part-time at a dental office and adored him, and I kept my mouth shut. The first time I helped them out financially, it was an emergency. Their landlord raised the rent by $400 with 30 days notice, and they were 2 months behind on a credit card, and Camille called me crying. I transferred $1,200 without thinking twice. She was my sister. Of course I did it. The second time was Donovan's truck breaking down. He needed it for work. At the time he was doing odd jobs, hauling equipment for a guy he knew. I lent him $800 and he paid back $200 of it before the subject quietly died. By the third, fourth, and fifth time, it had stopped feeling like emergencies and started feeling like a system. I was the backup, the cushion, the person Camille called when things got tight, which was every 3 or 4 months like clockwork. I never kept a running total because I didn't want to become that kind of person, the kind who tracks family favors like a ledger. But if I'm honest with myself, and I have been very honest with myself in the months since Poppy's birthday, the number was somewhere north of $8,000 over 4 years. Not counting the time I bought their groceries for 2 weeks when Donovan's side work dried up. Not counting the birthday and Christmas gifts I bought for their 2 kids every single year. Nice gifts, thoughtful gifts, because they were my nephews and I loved them. Not counting the time I co-signed a lease for them because their credit was too low, which I will never ever do again for anyone in my life. Poppy's birthday is in April. This year I decided to do something low-key and sweet. A small party at my apartment, just close family. Her 2 best friends from school, some homemade cupcakes. Poppy had been going through a rough few months. Her dad and I had separated the year before and she was still adjusting, still having nights where she'd crawl into my bed at 2 a.m. And I'd hold her and not say anything because sometimes there's nothing to say. She deserved a day that was just hers. Calm, happy, full of people who loved her. I spent 3 weeks planning it. I made the cupcakes from scratch the night before. Lemon with lavender frosting, because that's her favorite. I ordered balloons in her favorite color, which is a very specific shade of coral that I had to call 2 different party stores to find. I bought her a gift I'd been saving up for, a professional-grade watercolor set, because she'd been painting constantly and her little dollar store set was falling apart. Camille and Donovan arrived 45 minutes late. I didn't say anything about that. Donovan had been in a mood since he walked in. I could tell by the way he moved through my apartment, hands in his pockets, jaw slightly tight, looking at things without really seeing them. I don't know what was going on with him that day, and honestly, it doesn't matter. What I know is that Poppy ran up to hug Camille and Donovan, barely looked at her. We did cake first because the kids were getting restless, then presents. Poppy's friends gave her a book series she'd been wanting and a bracelet-making kit, and she was glowing. My mom gave her a soft throw blanket with her name embroidered on it. I gave her the watercolor set and she made a sound I can only describe as a small gasp, like she couldn't believe it was real. And she hugged me so tight my ribs hurt in the best possible way. Then she opened the gift from Camille and Donovan. It was a gift bag, the kind with tissue paper. Inside was a small stuffed animal, The generic kind you see in the checkout aisle at a pharmacy. The ones with the plastic eyes that don't quite line up. There's nothing wrong with the stuffed animal. Poppy would not have cared. She's 9 and she still sleeps with a stuffed elephant she's had since she was 2. But Donovan watched her pull it out of the bag, and something crossed his face and he said it. That's a pretty sad little gift for a pretty sad little kid. I think he meant it as self-deprecating humor, like, haha, we didn't get her much, isn't that funny? But the way it came out with that little emphasis on sad, and the way his eyes moved to my watercolor set when he said it, and the smile that followed, it wasn't self-deprecating. It was something else. Poppy went quiet. Her friends looked at each other. My mom looked at me. Camille said, Donovan, in a soft voice, the voice she uses when she wants to smooth something over without actually addressing it. He shrugged. I'm just saying, some kids get the whole spread. He gestured vaguely at the table. Must be nice. I stood up. I wasn't thinking clearly in the way that you think clearly when you're making a logical decision. I was thinking clearly in a completely different way. The way you think when something has been building for a very long time and a final thing happens and suddenly you see everything with total, terrible clarity. Hey, Bug, I said to Poppy. Can you take your friends to your room and show them your new paints? I'll come get you guys in a few minutes. She looked at me. She knew. Kids always know. But she nodded and gathered up her friends and they disappeared down the hall. I waited until I heard her door close. Then I looked at Donovan and I said, very quietly, you need to apologize to my daughter. He blinked. It was a joke. It wasn't funny. Camille put her hand on his arm. I think maybe. She's 9, I said. She made herself excited for today. She has been talking about this birthday for 2 months, and you sat in her home and called her sad in front of her friends. Donovan leaned back in his chair. You're being dramatic. And that was it. That was the word that finished it. I went to my room. On my nightstand I keep a small notebook where I've written down. And I'm not proud that I kept this, but I did. Every time I transferred money to Camille. Every time I spotted them, not because I wanted to hold it over anyone, but because I was scared. Some part of me was always scared that one day I would need to remember. I came back to the kitchen table and I set the notebook down. I didn't open it. I just put it there. Donovan looked at it. Camille looked at it. I've helped you, I said. A lot. Over a lot of years. I did it because I love Camille and because I thought we were family and because I believe that when people are struggling, you help them. I never asked for anything back. I never made you feel small about it. Donovan opened his mouth. I'm not done, I said. He closed it. I have one kid. She is 9 years old. Her parents just separated and it has been a hard year for her. Today was supposed to be her day. And you sat in my home, a home I pay for by myself, and you made her feel like she was less than. Camille's eyes were wet. She said, he didn't mean. I know you love him, I said. I'm not talking to you right now, I'm talking to him. I looked at Donovan and I said the thing I had been not saying for 4 years. I'm done. I'm not a bank. I'm not a cushion. I'm not someone you get to disrespect. Starting today, I'm done. He laughed a short, disbelieving sound, over a joke. Over a pattern, I said. My mom, who had been silent through all of this, who is not a woman who involves herself in confrontation, said quietly from the corner, Donovan, I think you should apologize. He looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at Camille, who was staring at the table. He didn't apologize. He pushed back his chair and said he'd wait in the car, and he walked out of my apartment. The door didn't quite slam, but it was close. Camille cried. I sat with her for a while because she is my sister and I love her, and none of this was simple. She said she was sorry. I believed her. I also knew that sorry and change are different things, and I'd spent years learning that lesson in other contexts. When she left, I went and got Poppy from her room. Her friend's parents had already texted that they were on the way. Poppy sat on the edge of her bed, holding the stuffed animal. She'd kept it, of course she had, because she's kind in a way I'm still learning from, and she looked up at me. Is everything okay? She asked. It will be, I said, and I meant it. That was 4 months ago. Camille called me twice in the 2 weeks after. The first call was to process her feelings, which I listened to. The second call was because a bill had come up, something with their car insurance, a rate increase they hadn't planned for, and she was wondering if I could help cover the difference. I said no. I said it kindly. I said it like someone who had made a decision and was at peace with it, which I was. She hasn't asked again. Donovan texted me once about 6 weeks after the party. It said, "Camille says I should reach out. Hope there's no hard feelings. No apology. Just hope there's no hard feelings." I didn't respond. Here's what I want to say to anyone who is sitting with a version of this story in their own life. The moment you stop, it will feel like you've done something wrong. It will feel selfish and cold, and like you've broken something that can't be fixed. People will tell you that family is family, that you should be the bigger person, that you're punishing the kids, when really it's the adults who messed up, and some of those things might even be true in complicated ways. None of that means you have to keep going. I went to Poppy's room that night after everything was cleaned up and her friends had gone home, and she was in bed with her new watercolor set balanced on her knees, already painting something on the blank paper I'd given her. She was painting a fox. She always paints foxes. I sat on the edge of her bed and watched her work, and she didn't look up, but she said, "Mom, do you think the gift was sad?" I said, "No, baby. I think it's really sweet that you kept it." She painted a little more. Then she said, "I don't think he was actually talking about the gift." 9 years old. I tucked her in, and I turned off the light, and I stood in the hallway outside her door for a long moment before I went to do the dishes. And I thought about all the versions of myself over the last 4 years who had stayed quiet to keep the peace. And I thought about the one version of myself who finally didn't. That version, I think, is the one worth keeping. Poppy said it before I did. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She's 9 years old, and she sat in her bed painting a fox and told me, without flinching, that she didn't think Donovan was actually talking about the gift. 9 years old. I've thought about that moment a lot since April, about what it means that a child can see so clearly what adults spend years learning to name. She didn't have the vocabulary for gaslighting or entitlement or financial exploitation. She just knew, the way kids know things in their bones, that something had been off for a long time and that the birthday party was just the day it finally came to the surface. There's a version of me, and I knew her well. I was her for years. Who would have let it go? Who would have pulled Donovan aside later and said something gentle, accepted the non-apology text 6 weeks later, and kept transferring money when Camille called because it was easier than sitting with the discomfort of saying no? That version of me was not weak. I want to be clear about that. She was doing the best she could with what she believed, which was that keeping the peace was the same thing as being good. It isn't. Being good, I've learned, requires something harder than silence. It requires being honest about what's actually happening, even when honesty costs you something. In my case, it cost me the version of the family dynamic I've been maintaining for 4 years. The one where I was the dependable one, the generous one, the one who never made things difficult. I liked being that person. There was something comfortable about being needed in that way, even when the need was becoming something closer to a drain. What Donovan did to Poppy cracked that open, and I'm grateful for it, as strange as that sounds. Not for what he said to her, I will never be grateful for that, but for the clarity it produced. Because some things you cannot unsee. Some moments strip away the version of events you've been telling yourself and leave you with what's actually true. What was true was that I had spent years absorbing the cost of someone else's choices, financially and emotionally, and in return I had been treated as a given, not as a person who was making a choice to be generous, but as a resource that was simply there. And when a resource doesn't perform the way you expect, you don't thank it, you resent it. That's what Donovan's comment really was, resentment wearing the costume of a joke. I don't think he's a monster. I think he's a person who never had to develop the discipline to live within his means, because there was always someone, me, Camille, whoever, absorbing the gap. And I think that kind of life, over time, hollows something out in a person. It makes them entitled without them even fully realizing it. That's not an excuse. It's just what I believe happens when accountability is never required. Poppy is doing well. She painted 12 foxes in the 2 weeks after her birthday. She told me she wants to put them in frames and hang them in her room. I told her we'd go pick out frames together, and we did, and they're up now. These 12 small foxes in mismatched frames along one wall, and every time I walk past them I think about what she said. Some kids get the whole spread. She has everything she needs. So do I. It just doesn't look the way I once thought it would, and I've made my peace with that.